Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz didn't just hunt for forgotten treasures, they built a dynasty out of dust and rust. Two longtime friends, chasing stories down winding backroads and turning junk into joy for millions of viewers. But while the world watched the laughs, the banter, and the brotherhood, something far more fragile was quietly unraveling beneath the surface. Behind every road trip and high five was a slow-burning tension that would eventually explode into silence, betrayal, and heartbreak. How did one of television's most iconic duos fall apart? What cracked the bond that once seemed unbreakable? For years, the truth was buried under silence. But now, piece by piece, it's coming to light, and the truth changes everything. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz's dream. American Pickers, one of the most successful reality shows on the History Channel, began as a far-fetched dream shared by two childhood friends from Iowa, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz. Their journey didn't begin on television. It began in alleyways, junkyards, and barns, far from the spotlight. But those dusty beginnings eventually laid the foundation for a show that would go on to captivate millions of viewers. Mike Wolfe had been what he called a picker, long before most people even knew what that term meant. According to Wolfe himself, he picked up his first discarded bicycle from the trash when he was just 6 years old. That one act sparked something in him. It wasn't just about collecting old things, it was about preserving history, understanding stories, and finding value in forgotten objects. Over time, that passion would evolve into a career and eventually a cultural phenomenon. Frank Fritz, meanwhile, was not just a business partner to Mike Wolfe, he was a childhood friend. Mike and Frank met while they were both attending Sudlow Intermediate School in Davenport, Iowa. They bonded over a shared experience that would shape their outlook on life. They both had grown up in households without a father figure. This created a sense of independence early on, and built a kind of understanding between them that would later translate into their on-screen chemistry. While Wolfe was the one who originally had the idea for American Pickers, Frank was one of the few people who took him seriously from the beginning. In fact, Mike has recalled that most people laughed when he pitched the concept. The idea of driving around the country, digging through people's garages and barns for antiques, and turning it into watchable television seemed ridiculous to many. But not to Frank. He believed in it, he believed in Mike, and he believed that what they had was different. That loyalty mattered, because when Mike finally succeeded in selling the idea to the History Channel, there was no doubt that Frank would be the co-host. Along with Danielle Colby, who managed the antique archaeology shop, the trio formed the original lineup that fans quickly grew to love. Danielle brought flair, organization, and a creative edge to the business. Mike brought vision and hustle, while Frank brought humor, relatability, and a grounded energy that balanced the show out. American Pickers officially premiered on January 18, 2010. From the very beginning, it struck a chord with audiences. The concept was simple but addictive. Mike and Frank would travel across America in their van, visiting collectors, hoarders, and everyday folks who had storied antiques buried on their property. They'd negotiate, haggle, crack jokes, and, most importantly, tell the stories behind the items. It wasn't just about buying and selling, it was about connecting the past to the present and turning trash into treasure. The show's debut episode drew over 3.1 million viewers, making it the highest-rated premiere for the network since Ice Road Truckers. This was no small feat, and it didn't stop there. At its peak, American Pickers would pull in over 5 million viewers per episode. It became a staple of the History Channel's programming lineup and helped redefine what reality TV could look like, without screaming matches or manufactured drama. The success of American Pickers wasn't just measured in viewership. Over the years, the show expanded far beyond what anyone had originally expected. It ran for over 26 seasons and produced more than 400 episodes. The format was replicated internationally with spin-offs like Aussie Pickers and broadcasts in multiple languages around the world. Antique archaeology, Mike's storefront in LeClaire, Iowa, became a tourist destination in its own right. And what had started as a risky idea became a global brand. But underneath the fame, the money, and the growing franchise, the original dream remained to explore forgotten parts of America, to meet interesting people, and to uncover history in the most unlikely of places. That's what Mike and Frank set out to do. And for many years, they did it together. For Frank, being on American Pickers wasn't just a job. It was the culmination of years of friendship, trust, and hard work. He once said in an interview that he felt they were on the verge of something big even before the show aired. And he was right. They were creating something unique, something that didn't rely on drama, but rather curiosity, knowledge, and genuine human connection. Frank had a knack for spotting overlooked value and added a necessary counterbalance to Mike's more fast-paced and risk-taking style. This balance helped carry the show for over a decade. While Mike was often the front man, the face of interviews and business deals, Frank provided consistency and a voice that many fans related to. Together with Danielle, they formed a trio that works. However, as with many long-running shows and business partnerships, the road wasn't as smooth as it looked on screen. As the years went on, cracks began to form, both behind the scenes and eventually in front of the public. Health issues, communication breakdowns, and growing tensions would all begin to test the strength of their original dream. What changed? Why did the bond between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz start to fracture after years of apparent success? The truth is tied to some heartbreaking details that they tried to keep hidden for years. Behind-the-scenes controversies and challenges. While American Pickers thrived for more than a decade as one of cable TV's most beloved reality shows, not everything happening behind the scenes matched the wholesome charm portrayed on camera. The show's smooth exterior often masked the reality of personal struggles, creative disagreements, and growing tension among its cast and production team. Over time, a number of controversies began surfacing. Some were public, while some were whispered, and those cracks would eventually begin to show. One of the earliest public issues involved Danielle Colby, who had been with the show from the very beginning. Known for her edgy style, artistic flair, and fierce independence, Danielle became more than just the shop manager. She was the glue between the road-picking adventures of Mike and his co-host, and the business side of antique archaeology. But outside of American Pickers, Danielle also ran a boutique and burlesque business, which at one point ran into financial trouble. According to public records, the Internal Revenue Service filed several federal tax liens against her related to unpaid taxes from her business activities between 2013 and 2015. While Danielle never denied the issue, she also didn't try to hide it. She addressed it in her own way, explaining that small business ownership came with real-world financial pressure, even for someone appearing regularly on a successful TV show. The tax issue never seemed to affect her position on American Pickers, but it did serve as a reminder that the show's cast members were juggling real lives behind their TV personas. Fans who had come to see Danielle as a symbol of quirky stability suddenly saw the weight of responsibility she carried off-screen. But apart from the controversies tied to the cast members, the show has also faced backlash for its production style. For years, American Pickers marketed itself as a fully unscripted reality series. The entire appeal was rooted in spontaneity. Mike and his co-host traveling across rural America, stumbling upon forgotten treasures, and negotiating deals with ordinary people. But as the show grew in popularity, some fans began to question whether everything they were seeing was as authentic as advertised. Accusations started appearing online, suggesting that many of the finds were arranged in advance. Some former participants claimed that producers contacted them long before filming, asking them to highlight specific items or clean up their spaces to look more interesting on camera. While the show never admitted to scripting scenes, and no conclusive evidence confirmed the accusations, the rumors were enough to create skepticism among longtime viewers. For a show built on authenticity and serendipity, even a hint of prearranged scenes felt like a betrayal to some. Addressing the accusations via social media, Mike Wolfe said, "Staged means we know where we're going." Yep, true story. Scripted? Negative. This comment made it clear that although the show's production style had evolved as its popularity grew, American Pickers still stayed true to its roots. But that's not all. The show also wasn't immune to the kind of internal friction that often builds over time in long-running television projects. As the seasons rolled on, speculation began swirling about favoritism behind the scenes. Some insiders suggested that certain cast members were given more favorable screen time or input into creative decisions. Others hinted at a growing imbalance in how personalities were treated on set. While these claims were never officially addressed by the network or producers, some fans couldn't help but wonder if things were as harmonious off-camera as they seemed on it. These rumors of discontent remained mostly in the background, until a major shift sent fans into a frenzy and dramatically changed the direction of the show. In the later seasons, longtime viewers noticed the sudden absence of Frank Fritz, and without any real explanation, the show moved forward with a slightly altered format. And as the change became permanent, viewers responded in a way that producers may not have expected. On social media, dedicated fans voiced frustration, confusion, and disappointment. Some fans even reportedly vowed to stop watching altogether because it felt like something central to the heart of the show had been lost. At the same time, American Pickers began to experience a measurable dip in viewership. Ratings, once impressively stable for a niche reality series, began to slide. While the show retained a loyal fan base, it was impossible not to notice that the departure of a familiar rhythm and a familiar personality had affected the audience's connection to the program. For years, fans had tuned in not just for the antiques, but for the banter, the chemistry, and the shared history between the original trio. With that dynamic disrupted, something essential felt missing. Attempting to stabilize the show and maintain its momentum, producers turned to someone already familiar to fans: Mike Wolfe's brother, Robbie Wolfe. Robbie had made occasional appearances throughout the years and was no stranger to the picking business. He was competent, had experience, and was comfortable in front of the camera. It seemed like a logical move, but the response was mixed. While Robbie handled the technical side of picking just fine, longtime viewers were quick to point out the difference in on-screen chemistry. The easy camaraderie, the inside jokes, and the decades of shared experiences that had once fueled the show simply weren't there. Many felt that Robbie's role, though well-intentioned, underscored the absence of what had been lost rather than replacing it. Comments rolled in across fan pages and social platforms, many stating that the new format felt like a shadow of its former self. All these challenges, from tax troubles and authenticity concerns to unspoken creative tensions, fan revolt, and declining ratings, signaled a shift in the show's identity. American Pickers was no longer just the story of two friends crisscrossing the country for forgotten treasures. It had become something else entirely, a long-running franchise trying to navigate changing dynamics while holding on to a fan base that still remembered what made the show so special in the first place. But these changes didn't happen in isolation. They were the result of something deeper. Because the moment Frank Fritz disappeared from the show, everything changed. And the reason behind his disappearance is more complicated than you could have imagined. The fallout that changed everything. For over a decade, American Pickers was defined by the steady rhythm of Mike and Frank. But in early 2020, without any formal announcement or on-air send-off, Frank Fritz, one of the show's original co-hosts, stopped appearing midway through season 21. At first, the explanation was straightforward. Frank had undergone back surgery and needed time to recover. According to early reports, He had been suffering from intense pain and required time away from filming to heal. The break seemed temporary, perhaps even normal, especially for someone who had spent years on the road, in and out of barns, climbing through dusty attics and lifting heavy objects. But as the episodes kept rolling without Frank, fans began to ask questions. Weeks turned into months. Then the months turned into a year. And still, no clear answers came. Behind the scenes, Frank was dealing with far more than just a bad back. For years, he had privately battled Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory bowel condition that can be both physically and emotionally draining. Managing the disease required strict dietary habits and frequent medical attention, and that's no easy task for someone living a mobile lifestyle. And then came the surgery, which led to an even more serious spiral. During his recovery, Frank developed a substance dependency, which is not an uncommon outcome for patients dealing with intense, long-term pain and post-operative treatment. Combined with past issues involving alcohol, this period marked one of the darkest chapters in Frank's life. And unfortunately, through it all, he felt completely alone. In a rare and candid interview, Frank opened up about his absence from the show. He revealed that not only had he been battling health problems and addiction behind closed doors, but he also hadn't heard a word from Mike Wolfe in over 2 years. According to Frank, while fans assumed the two were still close and that his absence was being managed with care, the reality was different. "I haven't talked to Mike in 2 years," Frank said. "He knew my back was messed up, but he didn't call me and ask how I was doing. That's just how it is." Those words, simple as they were, carried weight. This was someone who had stood beside Mike Wolfe for over a decade, helped build the show from the ground up, and weathered the ups and downs of life on the road. Now, he was recovering from multiple health battles, watching the show continue without him, and feeling, in his own words, completely sidelined. Frank didn't hold back about the imbalance he felt during his time on the show either. He said, "The show is tilted toward him 1,000%. Though fans had long suspected that Mike received more screen time, more credit, and more visibility, Frank's comments confirmed what many had only guessed. While Frank had his own fan base and a unique on-air presence, it became increasingly clear that he felt like the sidekick, not the equal partner he had once believed himself to be. Finally, in July 2021, Mike finally broke his silence and confirmed publicly that Frank would not be returning to the show. In a carefully worded Instagram post, Mike thanked Frank for the years they had shared, writing, "I will miss Frank, just like all of you, and I pray for the very best and all good things for him on the next part of his journey." It was a polite, calm, composed, and seemingly respectful message. But for Frank, it rang hollow. In response, Frank kicked against Mike's public statement. In his view, it was too little and too late. The gesture didn't erase the silence, the distance, or the feeling of betrayal. What hurt most wasn't just being let go, it was being ignored during the hardest stretch of his life. The man he thought of as a brother hadn't been there when it counted. The fallout didn't stop with Mike. Danielle Colby, who had long been a neutral and steady presence on the show, posted cryptic but pointed messages around the time of Frank's official departure. In one of them, she wrote about the importance of accountability, hinting at deeper issues within the cast. In another, she spoke about the pain caused by people refusing to take responsibility for their actions. While she never named Frank directly, the timing of the posts led fans to connect the dots. For some, it was seen as a subtle endorsement of Mike's position. For others, it raised questions about the full story behind Frank's absence. But it didn't end there. More revelations came, and this time, from Mike himself. In later interviews, Mike disclosed that one of the major reasons Frank couldn't return was because he had failed to meet the network's requirements. Specifically, Frank had reportedly been unable to pass the toxicology screenings that were mandatory for cast members. For a show that involved constant travel, close contact with the public and demanding production schedules, the network had little choice. Safety and reliability were non-negotiable. As painful as the decision was, Mike explained that the situation was out of his hands. Frank's health and personal choices had created a barrier to any possible return. Legal troubles soon followed. Frank was allegedly hit with reports of unpaid taxes, owing over $5,000 in back taxes to the state of Iowa. It was a devastating moment for fans who had followed Frank from the beginning. Despite the disagreements or controversies that had emerged over the years, there was still a deep well of goodwill for him, and watching him face these challenges publicly was painful. However, in the years following Frank's public fallout with the show, something began to shift. And against all odds, there came a reunion that no one saw coming. The reunion that healed old wounds. For years, the bond between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz had been the emotional backbone of American pickers. But by the early 2020s, that connection had frayed to a breaking point. Miscommunication, hurt feelings, and public fallout left both men walking separate paths, each with a sense of unfinished business. But in the end, life had its own way of pulling people back together, often when it mattered most. In July 2022, news broke that Frank had suffered a severe stroke. The reality was grim. He was found unresponsive in his Iowa home and rushed to the hospital, where he was stabilized before being moved to a rehabilitation facility. The stroke had left him physically impaired, mentally foggy, and unable to care for himself. For someone known for his independence and no-nonsense grit, it was a heartbreaking turn. The public hadn't heard from Frank in months, and until that point, Mike Wolfe had mostly remained silent. But when the news of the stroke went public, Mike did something unexpected. He posted a deeply personal message on Instagram asking fans to pray for his friend. It was simple but emotional. He wrote, "Frank, I pray more than anything that you make it through this okay." The post marked a shift. It was the first public sign that the door between them might not be fully closed. In the months that followed, Frank remained in rehab, under the care of a legal guardian. His ability to speak and move had been limited, and his recovery was uncertain. But in May 2023, something happened that no one had predicted. Frank reportedly asked to see Mike. It had been more than 3 years since they'd spoken. The silence between them had been filled with public statements, hurtful words, and growing distance. But when Frank made that request, Mike didn't hesitate. He immediately showed up. The visit took place in a quiet hospital room, far away from television cameras or public attention. According to a close mutual friend, the moment was raw, deeply emotional, and overwhelming. That hospital reunion, quiet as it was, allowed both men to begin healing the emotional wounds left behind. After all the years of silence, being there was enough. And as time passed, Mike continued to visit Frank regularly. Whatever bitterness had existed was replaced with peace. Sadly, that peace came in the final chapter of Frank's life. On September 30th, 2024, Frank Fritz passed away at the age of 60. His health had declined steadily after the stroke, and despite rehab efforts, his body could not fully recover. What mattered most in those final moments, though, wasn't his diagnosis or condition. It was who was by his side. Mike Wolfe had remained close in the final months, and was there in the hospital when Frank took his last breath. According to those present, Mike held Frank's hand during his final moments. It was quiet, intimate, and devastating. Speaking about the experience, Mike said, "I got the call that he wasn't doing well. I just feel blessed that I was able to get there. I was there for about an hour before he passed, and I was holding his hand and rubbing his chest when he took his last breath. I took my fingers and I closed his eyes." When asked about his last words to Frank, Mike said, "I just told him that I wasn't mad at him, and that I loved him, and that I cared about him so much, And then, when I could see that he was struggling, I just said, "Just go find your mom. Go find her right now. Just go find her." After Frank's passing, tributes poured in from across the American Pickers family and far beyond. Danielle Colby, who had once hinted at behind-the-scenes tension, chose to focus on Frank's better qualities. She posted a heartfelt message, remembering his sharp humor, his huge heart, and the energy he brought to every room. Robbie Wolfe, Mike's brother and later co-host, also paid tribute. Though he had stepped in after Frank's exit, he never tried to replace him. But the most moving words came from Mike. In a statement posted shortly after Frank's passing, Mike reflected not only on their friendship, but also on the man Frank truly was beneath the tough exterior. He said, "I've known Frank for more than half my life, and what you've seen on TV has always been what I have seen. A dreamer who was just as sensitive as he was funny. The same off-camera as he was on, Frank had a way of reaching the hearts of so many by just being himself." Fans, too, shared their grief. Social media platforms were flooded with stories, memories, and photos from viewers who had watched Frank over the years. Many called him irreplaceable. Some remembered his dry wit, others his eye for antique signs and small collectibles. For many, Frank wasn't just a TV personality, he felt like family. He was the guy who said what he thought, laughed at corny jokes, and made you feel like the search for rusty treasures actually meant something. Frank's death marked the end of an era for American Pickers, and for a generation of viewers who grew up watching two friends dig through America's forgotten past. But the story doesn't end there. Because for Mike Wolfe, the memories didn't stop the day Frank died. If anything, they only became more vivid, and we finally understand some details that were kept hidden from the public. What does Mike Wolfe remember? Even as American Pickers continues on the History Channel with new episodes, new locations, and new faces, longtime fans often echo the same sentiment. Something has been missing ever since Frank Fritz left. Since his passing, Mike Wolfe has made it clear that despite the tensions that may have existed between them, he has never underestimated the role Frank played in shaping the show. Mike has publicly acknowledged that American Pickers wouldn't have become the cultural touchstone it did without Frank's on-screen energy and unique eye for overlooked treasures. In interviews and tributes, Mike has reflected on how Frank had a genuine love for picking, not just the business side, but the thrill of the hunt, the joy of storytelling, and the satisfaction of finding value in forgotten corners of America. Frank's personal passion projects also left a lasting impression. His antique shop, Frank Fritz Finds, located in LeClaire, Iowa, remains a popular stop for fans. Even during his absence from the show, the store continued to draw crowds, a testament to how deeply people connected with him. Visitors recall Frank's favorite picks: rare oil cans, vintage advertising signs, antique toys, and of course, his quirky collection of peanut-related memorabilia. He had a knack for discovering items that didn't just have resale value. They also had history, character, and charm. But perhaps Frank's biggest contribution was the inspiration he gave to a new generation. He made collecting feel accessible. He wasn't trying to sell a lifestyle, he just loved the art of the pick. Thousands of fans have since shared how watching Frank on TV made them dig through their grandparents' barns or start small antique collections of their own. In that way, his legacy continues far beyond the episodes he appeared in. Despite all the challenges, disputes, and heartbreak, Mike remembers Frank not for the feud, but for the dream they shared and the journey they built together. As he once said, Frank was a dreamer. And for millions of viewers who tuned in week after week, that dream and Frank's part in it will never be forgotten. Who was your favorite picker on American Pickers? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.